When I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the courtroom that morning, the smell of old pine and the low hum of people whispering still hung in the air. I walked in with a heart that no longer remembered what fear felt like. On the left, my daughter, Lydia, shot me a quick glance, then leaned toward Michael and murmured something. He smirked, as if my presence here was some kind of joke, but in that exact moment, something I never expected happened. Judge Samuel Whitford, tall, silver-haired, usually stern as stone, looked up, saw me, and froze. He lowered his glasses, looked again as if his eyes were lying to him, and whispered under his breath, "It's her." The entire courtroom went silent. The opposing attorney stopped mid-sentence, his mouth open but empty of words. Lydia looked at the judge, then back at me, her face unraveling. Michael frowned, and for the first time in months, I saw something in his eyes. Something he couldn't control. A kind of invisible power that didn't belong to him. I didn't understand what was happening. I only knew one thing. That look on the judge's face wasn't the look you give a defendant, or an old, useless woman, the way Michael always hinted at me. It was the look of a man seeing a ghost he once believed was gone from his life. No one else in that room knew why he reacted that way. No one, except me. Because they didn't know who I used to be. They didn't know that I, Elaine Harper, 68 years old, once carried a name no one could tarnish, until the people I loved most tried. But the story didn't begin in that courtroom. It began months earlier, in the old wooden house in Asheville, the place I spent 40 years turning into a home. Back then, my life was simple. Every morning at 6, I poured coffee into the enamel mug with the tiny crack along the rim, the one Thomas, my husband, used to call the age line. I'd stand by the window, looking out at the Blue Ridge Mountains wrapped in fog, watering the mountain laurels he cared for until his last day. A quiet life, a small, gentle rhythm. When Thomas passed, I thought the only thing left would be the bond between me and Lydia. I thought grief would pull us closer, not stretch us so far apart we barely felt like family anymore. I was wrong. What came after wasn't closeness, it was distance, then coldness, then a kind of cruelty that still makes my throat tighten when I think about it. Lydia, the daughter I spent my whole youth raising, changed completely after she married Michael. He was the kind of man who talked like he was issuing orders and looked at people like they were worth pennies. But me, foolish as I was, I kept the door open for them every Sunday. Set the table, made the pot pie Lydia had loved since she was little. I thought, if I just tried harder, things would get better. But they didn't. Sunday after Sunday, I watched Lydia slip out of my reach. Her voice changed, her eyes changed, even the way she looked at me changed, like I was a burden she didn't want to admit she carried. And that was before I learned how much worse things truly were. That day, Lydia told me they needed my house. The cabin Thomas built plank by plank. The home where Lydia and I laughed, cried, and lived almost our entire lives. The place we called, with simple affection, the Harper cabin. They wanted me to leave, to move into a retirement community, a place better for someone your age. A place, Michael said, where I would fit in more. I thought that was rock bottom. It wasn't. I still didn't know another cliff was waiting. So when I stood in that courtroom today, I wasn't the fragile old woman they tried to push out of their lives. I was the woman holding a truth they had no idea existed. A truth that could destroy everything they planned. And Judge Whitford, the man who whispered, "It's her," was the piece no one ever saw coming. Life is strange like that. Seeds you planted 30 years ago bloom right when you need them most. If you've ever faced a moment when someone you love betrayed you, or you've had to rise from a pain someone you trusted caused, stay with me. This story isn't just mine. And if something in what I've said touches you, go ahead and like or subscribe. Not for me, but so stories about dignity and quiet strength can reach the people who truly need them. And maybe so I'll know that somewhere out there, you're listening to me tell this. After that day in court, while whispers still floated in the room like dust caught in a ray of light, my mind wandered back to the quiet mornings before everything fell apart. The mornings when I still believed my life, though not wealthy, was at least peaceful. the mornings before I knew what it felt like to be pushed out of the very home I spent my whole life building. I remember every detail: the smell of fresh coffee, the crisp Blue Ridge air spilling through the window, the slight tremble in my hand as I lifted the enamel mug with that thin crack running along the rim. Thomas used to tease that the crack was the signature of time, and that anything that stayed with you long enough would carry its own marks of attachment. That old wooden house, the Harper cabin, wasn't just a place to live, it was a living album. Every scratch on the floor, every window frame, every pencil mark Lydia drew when she was little, all of it was a piece of the story I thought I'd hold until my last breath. But the truth is, even the safest place can slip out of your hands when the person you love most turns their back on you. I always thought Lydia understood that. The little girl I held every night, the one who wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "Mom, you're the person I love most in the world." That child, now 32, slowly became someone I could no longer recognize. I don't know when the change began. Maybe it was after she met Michael, maybe after the wedding, or maybe, painfully, it was sooner, and I just wasn't ready to see it. After the wedding, every visit from Lydia felt like another inch of distance added between us. Her voice changed, colder, firmer, almost rehearsed, like she was trying to prove she didn't belong here anymore. And Michael, from the first moment, I saw the arrogance hiding under his polite smile. He walked into my home like he was inspecting a cheap hotel room, leaning back in Thomas's chair, glancing around the living room as if he was appraising the furniture. I told myself I was being too sensitive, but with time, the truth didn't just show itself, it slapped me right across the face. They only visited because I begged. Every Sunday, I set the table, wiped down the counters, laid out the embroidered tablecloth Thomas gave me on our 20th anniversary, and cooked Lydia's childhood favorite, pot pie. But the eyes that looked back at me were empty. There was one Sunday I'll never forget, even before the awful night they asked me to leave my own home. Lydia arrived looking strangely worn. She didn't hug me, didn't smile, didn't ask how I was. She just walked into the kitchen, sat down, and stared at her phone. I asked gently, "Are you all right, Lydia?" She replied without looking up, "Mom, don't worry about my business." My business. When did I stop being her mother? When did I become someone she felt the need to keep at arm's length? Michael was the same as always, opening my fridge, grabbing a beer, dropping onto the chair Thomas used to sit in every morning, as if it belonged to him, as if the house had no history before they walked in. I felt myself being pushed to the edges of my own home, a home that once held the heartbeat of our family. The visits got shorter, the calls fewer, the messages colder. One day, Lydia said, "Mom, I'm busy. Stop calling so much. Michael doesn't like hearing the phone when I'm working." I asked, "Is it you who doesn't like it, or is it Michael?" She went silent, and that silence said more than any answer ever could. I knew what Michael was doing, controlling the circle around her, shaping her habits, her opinions, her world. Men like him isolate first, dominate later. But I never thought he'd pull her this far away. Far enough that she didn't recognize the mother who raised her with these same worn hands. Far enough that she let him speak to me like I was beneath him. Far enough that she stopped seeing me altogether. I remember one moment so clearly. Lydia looked around the cabin with a strange expression and said, "Mom, why don't you live somewhere better? Somewhere you can be cared for?" I smiled, a small, tired smile. "Better? This is my home. You grew up here." She didn't answer. She just turned to Michael. He shrugged. Watching the two of them standing in the house I built with my whole life, I suddenly felt like a guest, a stranger. They didn't say it out loud, but I understood. To them, the cabin was no longer Mom's home. It was an asset. And their eyes would only grow colder in the days that followed. There are things you stand in the middle of every day without realizing you're walking toward a cliff. You keep watering your plants, keep cooking, keep hoping, not knowing that someone is quietly drawing a line to erase you from your own life. I didn't see it. I didn't feel it. Not until that day. The day Lydia and Michael walked in wearing matching smiles, half pity, half calculation. The day they said 5 words that shattered everything. "We need the house, Mom." And from that moment, everything began slipping through my fingers like water. If you want to know how someone truly sees you, watch how they treat you when they think you have nothing left to give. I learned that lesson far too late. I will never forget that night. The night Lydia told me they needed the house. Even thinking about it now sends a cold shiver down my spine, like a mountain breeze slipping through a window I know I had closed. It was a Thursday, a gray, drizzling Asheville evening. Mist clung to the Blue Ridge Mountains like a thin veil of sadness. I spent the whole morning preparing the pot pie Lydia had loved since she was little. I kneaded the dough carefully, added a pinch of thyme, the way Thomas always said would make the dish taste like spring was coming early. I wiped the wooden table, laid out the hand-embroidered cloth I made the year Lydia turned 17. Placed a small vase of wildflowers I'd picked from the path behind the cabin. Little things, quiet ways of saying, I miss you, even though no one noticed them anymore. I wanted that dinner to feel less cold than the last few Sundays. I wanted Lydia, even for a moment, to remember the years when she hugged me and asked, Mom, when do I get to be a grown-up? I wanted that feeling back, even if I knew it was impossible. When the doorbell rang, my heart beat the way it did when I was 40, waiting for my daughter after school. But the first face I saw wasn't Lydia. It wasn't the smile she used to bring home. It wasn't the eyes that once lit up just seeing me. It was Michael. He entered like a man stepping into his own property. No hello, no glance at me, not even the smallest gesture of respect. He went straight to the armchair, Thomas's armchair, the one he used to sit in while reading the morning paper. Michael dropped into it, turned on the TV, and made himself comfortable, as if this house belonged to him. One simple movement, but enough to make me feel like I no longer belonged in my own home. Lydia walked in a few seconds later. She wore the blue dress I bought her for her birthday last year. I should have been happy she wore it. But her eyes made me want to look away. They didn't seek their mother. They didn't soften the way a child's eyes do when they return home. They examined, measured, just like Michael's. Mom, we need to talk. Her voice was tight, cold, like the winter wind sweeping down from Mount Mitchell. I set the table, my hands trembling just a little. Can we eat first, Lydia? We can talk after. She didn't answer. She sat down like she was walking into her office. Michael and I made a decision, she said. Michael glanced over, expression flat as stone. I didn't know why, but my heart began pounding. This house, Lydia said, her eyes drifting around the room as if she were inspecting real estate, not the place where she took her first steps, is too big for you. I forced a small, calm smile. You're worried about me? I'm managing just fine here. Michael turned the TV volume up, just enough to overshadow my voice. Then, without looking at me, he said a sentence I can still hear word for word. Mrs. Elaine, someone like you needs a place more suited to your situation. A place with care. Someone like you. As if I wasn't his wife's mother. As if I were a burden. I looked at Lydia, praying she'd disagree. But she didn't. She nodded. We found a really good place, Lydia said, pulling glossy brochures from her bag. Near Lake Junaluska. They have nurses, an indoor pool, yoga classes for seniors. You'll like it there. The next sentence cut straight through me. And, well, we need space. This house is perfect for raising a family. I froze. My whole body felt like it dropped into a silent pit. I spoke, my voice shaking, but still trying to hold on to dignity. Lydia, you grew up here, remember? You slept on that rug in front of the fireplace every Christmas. Thomas hung every string of lights on the porch. Every nail on these walls was put in by your father. This is our home. Lydia shrugged, like I told her a story she barely cared about. Memories are in the heart, Mom, not on the walls. I had never heard my daughter's voice so cold, and I had never seen Michael look around my home with eyes that already believed everything inside belonged to him. He stood up then, blinking with calculation. You don't need to worry about the paperwork. We'll handle it. Everything's already in motion. Paperwork for what? I asked, though my heart already knew. Michael smiled, a smile with no kindness in it. The transfer, into our name. And just like that, all the sound left the house. The pot pie cooled on the stove. The wildflowers I picked that morning wilted in their vase. Even the familiar scent of pine seemed to fade, replaced by something cold and unfamiliar. I don't remember what I said next. I only remember standing there, listening to the two people I once called family talk about my home as if I were already gone. And only the cabin mattered. Eventually, I managed to whisper, I need time to think. Lydia didn't hesitate. There's nothing to think about, Mom. We've already decided. The appraiser comes next week. Then they stood up, ignored the table I set, ignored the meal I spent all morning making, ignored me, standing there like a shadow. The door closed, no goodbye, no hug, no hesitation, just silence. And in the quiet cabin, all I could hear was the sound of my own heart breaking. If I had known that this was only the beginning, maybe I would have braced myself. But I didn't know. No one ever knows before the real pain arrives. I will never forget the morning after. The morning that marked the beginning of the days when my beloved home was treated like a listing on the market, and I like a bystander in the life I had built with my own hands. Asheville lay under a thin veil of fog. Cold air rolled down from the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I wrapped myself in the wool scarf Thomas knitted for me the winter before he passed. I sat in the kitchen, my tea still hot but my hands cold as stone. I didn't move. Not for almost an hour, just stared out the window at the tall pines swaying quietly in the wind. I was waiting for something to change. But the thing that changed was the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. It wasn't Lydia. It wasn't someone checking in on me. It was a man in a gray suit carrying a file bag and a laser measuring tool. And behind him, Michael. Before I even stood up, Michael walked in as if he'd had a key to my home for years. He pointed toward the man. This is Mr. Carter, the appraiser. He's here to assess the house. Mr. Carter walked in with the posture of someone who'd seen too many homes, and seen too many homeowners as nothing more than outdated furniture. He didn't look at me, didn't greet me, didn't acknowledge me. He opened his notebook and began writing. I finally found my voice, thin as the morning mist. You came without telling me? Michael answered sharply. This needs to be done soon. Don't complicate things. I stood there and watched Mr. Carter open every door, measure every wall, photograph every corner of my home as if he were inspecting an abandoned property. Not my home. Not the place where I lived for over 30 years. Not the place where Thomas composed his first melody. Not the place where Lydia took her first steps. And the worst part? Lydia walked beside him, nodding along like everything he said made perfect sense. These walls need repainting. The faucet is old. The kitchen looks dated. Too many sentimental items. This won't sell well. Every sentence was a small blade twisting slowly. I took a breath. Lydia, do you not see that this is my home? She didn't turn around, didn't pause, didn't look at me. She just said, Mom, this has to be done. Has to be done. As if I were a problem to be removed. As if I were no longer her mother. The next day, Lydia brought brochures. I still remember the sound of the glossy paper hitting the wooden table, a sound colder than first snow. Mom, you should look at these, Lydia said, her voice soft but loaded with something else. There's a beautiful retirement center, lots of activities, an indoor warm water pool too. I held one brochure up, white rooms, white walls, white everything. No pine wood, no old woven rug, no fireplace, no Lydia running barefoot as a toddler, no Thomas smiling, placing his hand on my shoulder after finishing a melody. A place with no trace of us. A place with no me. I set the brochure down. So, you want to send me there? Lydia flinched like I'd accused her unfairly. It's not sending you, Mom. It's for your safety. Michael stood behind her with his arms crossed, eyes like winter steel. At your age, you need care. Don't argue. I looked at both of them, And I knew, then, that they had been discussing this for a long time. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't concern. This wasn't love. It was a plan. A plan shaped by Michael, and agreed to, willingly, by my daughter. A pain so sharp spread through my chest that I had to grip the edge of the table. And then came the worst day. Lydia and Michael walked into the house. Behind them was another man, their private attorney. "Mrs. Elaine, we've prepared the documents," he said, placing a thick folder on the wooden table. "Once you sign, the transfer becomes legally binding." I looked at Lydia, the words scraping out of me. "You want to take your mother's home?" Lydia avoided my eyes. "Mom, this is best for everyone." I shook so hard I had to steady myself. "Best for who? For me? Or for the two of you?" Michael cut in with a smug tone. "Stop making this difficult, Mrs. Elaine. This house isn't suitable for you anymore." The lawyer added, "If you refuse to sign, we may have to explore legal avenues, such as evaluating your mental competency." I stared at him in disbelief. "So you're saying you're prepared to declare me incompetent?" Michael shrugged. "If necessary." Lydia didn't interrupt, didn't defend me, didn't speak. My daughter, the little girl who cried when I cut my hand, the child who feared losing me more than anything, stood silent as they threatened me. The world fell away. All I could say was, "I need time." Michael replied, cold as concrete, "You have 1 week." That night, snow fell softly outside. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by old photographs, wooden boxes filled with Thomas's letters, Lydia's forgotten childhood toys, all scattered like pieces of my shattered heart. I cried harder than I had since the day Thomas died. I cried for Lydia, for the house, for how easily the people I loved most tore my life apart. And then, in the middle of the night, too exhausted to cry anymore, my eyes landed on a small drawer under Thomas's desk. A drawer I had never opened, not locked, but somehow waiting. I pulled it open, and my fingers touched an old leather folder with a tiny lock on it. My heartbeat stuttered. I found the key. And when I opened it, I had no idea my life was about to take a turn Lydia and Michael could never have imagined. That leather folder sat in my hands like it held the weight of all 40 years of my life. It wasn't big, it wasn't thick, but something about it, something I couldn't name, kept me from looking away. As if Thomas had placed it there, in that old desk drawer, knowing that one day, on the darkest day of my life, I would need it. The tiny lock on the cover was slightly rusted. My hand trembled so hard I nearly dropped the key. When the lock finally clicked open, the soft snap echoed in the quiet room, and my heart kicked hard against my ribs. I opened it, and the moment I saw what lay inside, I knew. My entire life was about to change direction. Inside was a stack of documents arranged with a kind of precision that felt almost chilling. Invoices, investment records, property certificates. And in the center, a yellowed envelope, worn at the edges, with Thomas's familiar handwriting, "For Elaine. Open only when you truly need it." I traced the words with my fingertips, read them 3 times. Truly need. I had never needed anything more. I opened the envelope, and the first page made me press a hand to my stomach to steady my breath. A will. Updated just 6 months before Thomas died. The house seemed to hold its breath with me. I turned the page and read the first line. "I, Thomas Harper, leave all my assets to my wife, Elaine Harper, unconditionally." I closed my eyes. I saw Thomas's face, the gentle smile, the laugh lines, the warm hands that never failed to find mine on winter nights. He had prepared for me. He had seen what I was too blind to see, Michael, and the quiet shift growing inside Lydia. I turned the page, and the next line nearly brought me to my knees. Thomas owned 4 properties around Asheville, not just the cabin, but land I never knew about. Rental homes, a small storefront near downtown, a plot of land in Black Mountain he had bought decades ago when prices were nothing. My mind spun. In 30 years of marriage, he had never once bragged about money, never lived lavishly, never boasted. He only saved, quietly. I turned another page, and this one almost made me sit down on the floor. Thomas owned 60% of the company where Michael worked. I whispered, barely a sound. "Oh my God, Thomas, what did you do?" Not out of fear, not out of panic, but out of disbelief and a gratitude so sharp it hurt. Michael, the man who stood in my home and spoke to me like an inconvenience, the man who planned to declare me mentally incompetent, the man who tried to push me out of my own life, worked for a company where I, not he, was the majority owner. One signature from me could end his job. My hand shook as I pressed it to my chest. I tried to breathe slowly, but my heart thrashed like a bird caught in a net. Then I reached the last piece, a handwritten letter. Thomas's letter. His voice came through the words, warm as sunlight, steady as the mountains around us. "My dear Elaine, if you are reading this, it means you are facing something difficult. I know you, strong, gentle, the kindest soul I've ever known, would never defend yourself if it meant hurting someone else. I leave everything to you, not to make you powerful, but so you will never have to survive anything alone. If Lydia treats you well, give her a part of it, but only if she deserves it. If she doesn't, protect yourself. I saw something in Michael long ago, and I wasn't wrong. Elaine, don't be afraid to use what I leave behind, not for revenge, but to stand tall. Remember this, you were never a burden." Thomas. I pressed the letter to my chest. Tears fell onto the page like rain. I whispered into the dim room. "Thomas, how did you see life so much faster than I did?" I stayed there until the clock struck 2 a.m., surrounded by documents, certificates, signatures, the quiet, powerful footprints Thomas left behind. And one truth shone brighter than the winter stars outside. I was not poor. I was not powerless. I was not being erased from my own life, unless I allowed it. Lydia wanted to sell this cabin? This was only a tiny part of what I owned. Michael wanted control? He was living off a company I held the reins to. Their lawyer threatened me? Irrelevant now. And suddenly, I laughed. A small, broken laugh, but real. Not because I wanted to mock anyone, but because I realized something simple. I thought I was cornered. But in reality, I was standing on the highest peak. I placed every document into Thomas's wooden keepsake box, closed the lid gently, and whispered, "Thomas, I understand now. Thank you for loving me in ways I never knew." The next morning, the first sunlight touched the cabin, and I was no longer the trembling Elaine from 2 days ago. I brewed my tea, tied my hair back, sat in the chair by the window, the one where Thomas used to play his guitar. And I waited, because I knew one thing for certain, Lydia and Michael would come back. And this time, I wasn't the vulnerable one. That morning, Asheville felt strangely clear, as if last night's storm had never happened. Soft sunlight slipped through the window and lit up the tiny dust particles floating in the air. I sat in the chair Thomas used every morning, sipping cinnamon tea. My heart wasn't racing anymore. My hands weren't shaking, and in my eyes was something I hadn't seen in months. The calm of someone who finally realizes she's holding the strongest hand. I didn't need to hide anymore, didn't need to lower my voice, didn't need to fear being bullied in my own home. I wasn't a victim, not anymore. When I heard a car pull into the driveway, I simply set my cup down. No flinching, no panic, no searching for a safe corner. I stayed seated and waited. The front door flew open, like it always did. Michael stepped in first, carrying that cheap, sharp cologne he used to mask his insecurity. Lydia followed him, slower, her eyes tired and avoiding mine. And behind them, the same lawyer from the other day, face stiff as granite. Michael scanned the cabin like a demolition supervisor checking progress. "Mrs. Elaine, we're right on schedule. I hope you're ready." For the first time in months, nothing about him scared me, not anymore, because now I knew the truth. The powerless one wasn't me. I gave him a small, calm smile. "You wanted to talk, so talk." Michael raised an eyebrow, unaccustomed to a version of me that didn't shrink. The lawyer cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Harper, we need your signature on the transfer forms today. We want to avoid complicated legal procedures." I leaned back, fingers interlacing calmly. "By complicated, you mean declaring me mentally incompetent, right?" Lydia froze. Her eyes flickered, the first crack in her confidence since all this began. Michael stepped forward. "Don't pretend you don't know, Elaine. You live alone. You forget gas. I have never forgotten to turn off the gas." My voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through his manipulation like a blade. Michael's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to me interrupting him, let alone stopping him completely. I continued, my voice steady and controlled. "But today, I have something to say first." I rose to my feet. No rush, no fear. I walked to the wooden table near the window and placed a folder on it. Not everything I found, just enough to change the temperature in the room. Then I turned back to them. "Michael, you know Blue Ridge Forestry, right?" His eyes narrowed. "Of course, I work there." I nodded. "Do you know who owns 60% of the company?" Confusion crossed his face. "Some anonymous investor. No one knows who." "No one knows," I repeated softly. "Except me." I laid the first document on the table. Shareholder record. Majority owner, Elaine Harper. Michael's face drained of color, as if cold water had been poured over his soul. Lydia covered her mouth. The lawyer froze completely. "And that," I said gently, "is only a small part of it." Silence fell so heavy I could hear the clock ticking. I went on, voice quiet but firm. "I don't just own the company you work for, Michael. I also own the land in Black Mountain, the supply shop downtown, and—" I looked directly at him. 4 other properties around Asheville. The air turned still, so still I could hear Michael swallow. He tried to smirk, but it twisted into something pitiful. "You think some papers will scare me?" I shook my head. "Not to scare you, just to remind you of something simple. I'm not the prey in your little game." Lydia's tears began to fall. "Mom, I didn't know, I swear." I looked at her, a long, quiet look. Not anger, not hatred, just the kind of hurt that doesn't have words yet. Then I turned to Michael again. "You tried to have me declared incompetent. You barged into my home like you owned it. You tried to force me out of the life I built." I pulled the folder closer. "But what you didn't know is that Thomas prepared everything to protect me from you." Michael's face went paper white. "Thomas, he's dead." "But what he left behind is very much alive," and I tapped the documents, "and it's in my hands." The lawyer swallowed hard. "Mrs. Harper, perhaps we should revisit this matter more amicably." I met his eyes. "I'm not signing anything. Nothing will be transferred. No one is removing me from my own home." Michael exploded. "You can't do this!" I smiled, slow, steady. "Wrong. I can, and I will." He took a step toward me, as if to shout in my face, but something stopped him. Maybe the look in my eyes, maybe the fear creeping into his own. I tilted my head slightly. "Do you still want to threaten me? Because if you do, I can call the Blue Ridge Forestry Board right now and suggest they rethink your position." He froze. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. I remained still, calm as morning light. "You have 2 choices, Michael. 1, leave peacefully. 2, leave with consequences." Lydia broke into sobs. "Michael, please stop. Enough." But he shoved her hand away, furious and cornered. He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the wooden walls. Silence returned to the cabin. Not the silence of pain, the silence of power restored to its rightful place. Lydia stood trembling, her eyes red and wet.
Mom, I'm sorry.
But her apology, it couldn't reach me yet, not today. I spoke one sentence, quiet but cold as mountain frost. Lydia, we will talk, but not today. That night I sat alone in the cabin. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. I touched Thomas's letter, feeling the warmth of him lingering in the ink. You see that, Thomas? I finally stood up. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Because Michael wasn't the type to walk away quietly, and what was coming next would test both me and Lydia in ways none of us expected. I thought that after Michael stormed out of my cabin, I'd be able to breathe again. I was wrong. Storms in life never come once. They come in waves, as if the universe wants to know how much you can bear before you finally break. The next morning, while I was making tea, my phone rang. Of course it was him. Michael's name lit up on the screen like a bad omen. I let it ring. Once, twice, 10 times. Silence. Then the phone buzzed again. A message this time. You'll regret this. Don't think you've won. I stared at the text and, to my own surprise, felt nothing. If this had happened a week earlier, my hands would have been shaking. Now, a small smile tugged at my lips. I pressed the phone to my chest and whispered, Thomas, you prepared me better than I ever realized. But what I didn't expect, the person who came knocking that morning wasn't Michael. It was Lydia. She stood in the doorway like a lost child, eyes swollen, shoulders trembling under a thin cardigan, hair tied back in a messy knot as if she'd been crying all night.
Mom.
Her voice cracked like glass. I opened the door and stood still. No rushing to embrace her, no comforting words. Lydia stepped inside, looking around the cabin as if she were seeing it for the first time. She touched the kitchen table, the same spot where she used to doodle as a child. Then she turned back to me. Mom, I'm sorry. 2 simple words, but not nearly enough. Not yet. I pulled out a chair. Sit down, Lydia. She sat, her breathing shaky. Mom, I didn't know about the properties, the company, the will. I didn't know anything. If I had known, I wouldn't. I cut in quietly. You shouldn't treat your mother well because of money, Lydia. She bit her lip. Tears spilled over. I know, and I was wrong. But Michael, he kept telling me. Her voice cracked. He told me you were a burden, that I had to think about my future, that sending you away was protecting us. I studied her. My daughter, who'd grown up under this roof, cried when she fell off her bike, pressed herself into my arms on stormy nights, promised me she'd never leave Mom alone. Now she sat there, breaking apart in front of me. Mom, she whispered, I was afraid of losing him. I placed my hand on the table, a small, steady gesture. And you nearly lost me. She broke into sobs, loud, shaking, raw, the kind of crying she hadn't done since childhood. But I didn't hold her, not yet. Some truths must hurt enough to be remembered. That afternoon, Lydia stayed for dinner. Neither of us spoke much. She washed the dishes, something she hadn't done since she moved out. She touched each item in the kitchen like walking through a museum of memories she'd abandoned. When she saw me place Thomas's box of documents back on the shelf, she asked softly, Mom, is there more about Dad? I looked at her. Yes. Lydia lowered her head. I want to know. I need to. I hesitated. Then I opened the box and pulled out Thomas's letter. Lydia took it with shaking hands. When her eyes reached the line, if Lydia treats you well, give her a part, but only if she deserves it. She collapsed into a chair as if her whole body lost strength. I don't deserve it. She whispered it like a confession. I stayed silent. Sometimes silence is the only truth strong enough to stay. The next day, I received a call I never expected. Mr. Rowan, the building manager where Lydia lived. His voice was low, tense. Mrs. Harper, I'm sorry to bother you, but Michael is here in the lobby. He's yelling, breaking things. He's claiming you kidnapped his wife. I closed my eyes. You were right. He wasn't going to stop. I drove straight to the building. When I walked into the lobby, I saw Michael, face unshaven, eyes bloodshot, the sharp smell of alcohol clinging to him like a second skin.
Elaine! He roared. What are you doing to my wife? You have no right!
I raised a hand. Michael, Lydia is at my home because she wants to be. No one took her. No one forced her. He laughed, a crooked, twisted sound.
You think you can take her from me? You think you've won?
I stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, and looked straight into his eyes. It's not that I won, Michael. You lost. You lost the moment you decided to throw a mother out of her own home. He lunged forward, but Mr. Rowan stepped between us.
Mr. Foster, the police are on their way.
Michael screamed one last desperate threat.
I'll take Lydia to court. I'll take everything back.
I spoke over him, calm as winter frost. The court will decide, Michael, not you. Security dragged him toward the door. His shouts echoed down the hallway, growing smaller with each step. When I turned back, Rowan stared at me, astonished. Mrs. Harper, I've never seen anyone stay so calm in a situation like that. I gave him a faint smile. A woman holding the truth has nothing to fear. When I returned to the cabin, Lydia was sitting on the sofa, hugging a pillow like a frightened child. She looked at me, eyes red, voice barely a whisper.
Mom, I don't know how to get away from him.
I watched her for a long moment. Then I spoke, firm, steady, unshakable. You will get away, Lydia, and I won't let you drown again. She reached for my hand, the first time in months.
Mom, I'm scared.
I squeezed her fingers gently. You don't have to be anymore, because from now on, we fight together. And as I said it, I knew the real battle was only beginning. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because of worry, but because of a strange kind of clarity, as if the last few weeks had built a new skeleton inside me, stronger, calmer. When I pulled back the curtains, light slipped into the cabin, soft, but bright enough that I had to squint. The whole Blue Ridge Range wore a pale golden veil, so peaceful it felt almost wrong, given the storm waiting ahead. Lydia walked out of the bedroom, her steps still unsteady. She wore a knit cardigan, eyes swollen from crying. But in them, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Will. Mom, she said quietly. I thought a lot last night. I nodded and poured her a mug of hot cocoa. Tell me. She wrapped both hands around the cup, the warmth making her fingers twitch. I want to leave him, she whispered. But I don't know where to start. I looked at the daughter I'd raised for 32 years. I saw her pain. And beneath that, what hurt me even more was how long she'd been bent out of shape by someone who wanted to break her. But now, at least, she was trying to stand. I laid my hand gently over hers. You're not alone. We'll do this step by step, slow but firm. Lydia nodded. I'm scared he'll come back. I smiled faintly. Michael can scream, he can threaten, but the one thing he can't outrun is the truth. And the truth now sat neatly inside the wooden box Thomas had left for me. Around 10 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Not Michael. That much I knew immediately. His knock was always angry, impatient, entitled. This knock was measured, polite, professional. I opened the door. A woman in her late 50s stood there, wearing an earth-toned coat, hair pulled back neatly, eyes bright and sharp. The kind of woman you can tell has real work to do the moment she walks into a room. Mrs. Elaine Harper? Her voice was deep and warm, not threatening. Yes. I'm Grace Benton, family attorney. Mr. Rowan referred me. She handed me a business card. He said there's an urgent matter involving psychological abuse, property threats, and possible litigation. So Rowan understood more than I'd realized. Good. Some men don't talk much, but they see exactly what needs to be seen. I invited her into the cabin. Lydia stood up quickly when she saw a stranger, but I reassured her, this is a lawyer. I asked her to come help us. Grace sat down, opened her case, pulled out a notebook and a pen. Tell me everything, Mrs. Harper, from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. So I told her, every detail, every threat, every time my home was invaded, every tear Lydia shed because she trusted the wrong man, every document, every word Thomas left behind. Grace listened to all of it without interrupting once. When I finished, she closed her notebook. This is clear, she said. Michael is using coercion, threats, and attempted asset stripping, and if he tries to file for full custody of your grandchild one day, he will lose. Decisively. Lydia instinctively placed a hand on her stomach. I don't want my baby growing up in violence and control. Grace's gaze softened as she looked at her. You won't have to, but you have to cooperate. No going back to him, no secret meetings, no answering his calls. Everything goes through legal channels now, through me. Lydia nodded immediately. Maybe for the first time in a long while, she felt someone besides me standing on her side. Then Grace turned to me. Mrs. Harper, I want to see all your husband's documents. I brought out Thomas's wooden box and opened it. Grace's eyes sharpened at once, focused, precise, like someone who just found the missing puzzle piece in a major case. My God, she murmured. He left everything to you. No conditions, all assets, and this. She held up the Blue Ridge Forestry share document. This is the strongest leverage you have. Michael has nowhere to run from this. I stayed quiet. Grace looked up at me, her expression shifting from professional to respectful. Your husband was a very smart man. He saw all this coming. I gave a small, sad smile. He always saw further than I did. That afternoon, while Lydia rested in the bedroom, I sat with Grace on the cabin porch, the same spot where Thomas used to play guitar on summer evenings. Grace said, Michael is going to do what desperate men do. He'll try to weaponize the law. He may file for full custody and claim you influenced Lydia to abandon her marriage. I exhaled. I figured as much. But this, she continued, flipping through her notes, is where your advantage is strongest. She pointed to one line in the will. Your husband worked with the court system. The person who notarized and acknowledged this updated will was Judge Samuel Whitford. My heart skipped. Samuel? He used to intern under Thomas. Grace nodded. And now he's one of the most respected judges in Buncombe County. He trusted your husband. We can use his prior involvement to secure solid legal standing for the will. His name will carry weight. A weight slid off my chest, not from having power, but from knowing the truth had a place to stand. Grace packed up her files. Mrs. Harper, Michael is going to lash out. You need to be ready. I raised an eyebrow. Ready for what exactly? For him to sue. And she was right. 2 days later, while I was folding the bedspread, the doorbell rang. I opened it. A man stood outside with a white envelope and an ID badge clipped to his jacket. Court summons from Mrs. Elaine Harper and Miss Lydia Harper. I took the envelope. No shaking hands, no shock. Just a steady, quiet acceptance. The way you stand when you've seen the storm on the radar days before it hits. When I opened it, the bold letters burned into my vision. Michael Foster petitions for full custody and accuses Elaine Harper of interfering in the marriage. I folded the papers, and I laughed. A thin, small laugh, but full of meaning. Michael, I whispered, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. I turned and looked around the cabin, the place I'd lived for 30 years. Then I said, almost like a prayer, almost like a promise, to the man who'd thought so far ahead of me. Thomas, you prepared me well. Now it's time for me to use everything you left. And just like that, the day I stopped merely surviving and started fighting back officially began. When the court summons lay on my old wooden table, the cabin fell into a silence so deep it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Lydia stood behind me, one hand resting over her stomach, her face pale, as if she'd just seen a ghost. "Mom, Michael really did this?" Her voice was thin as morning mist. I set the letter down and turned to her. "You know how it is, Lydia. When a man like Michael loses control, he'll do anything, even the cruelest things." Tears welled in her eyes again. "I created this monster." I squeezed her hand gently. "No, you were misled. The one who created that monster is him." But I also knew one thing clearly. If we let emotion take over, we would lose. Because Michael wasn't just skilled at manipulating the woman he married, he was skilled at manipulating the law. That afternoon, Grace Benton arrived at the cabin again. Her face was serious, but not afraid. I placed the envelope on the table. He started. Grace opened it, skimmed the contents quickly, and exhaled through her nose. "As expected, he's trying to paint you as the person who encouraged Lydia to leave the marriage, and he's using that to justify a custody grab." Lydia wiped her eyes, her voice cracking. "But none of that is true." Grace looked at her steadily. "The painful thing about family court is that truth doesn't always matter as much as perception and evidence, but in your case," she placed the summons on the table and looked at us both. "We have both." A faint warmth spread across my chest. Grace continued. "I've spoken with Judge Samuel Whitford. He remembers your husband very well, and he's willing to verify the validity of the updated will. That will be one of our strongest shields against Michael's accusations." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Grace. I don't know what I'd do without you." Grace smiled gently. "Mrs. Harper, most of the strength didn't come from me or from those documents. It came from you. You stood up at exactly the right moment." I pressed my hands together to steady myself. She was right. But she didn't know the whole truth. I stood up because of a man who was no longer here, yet somehow still protecting me. Thomas, the quiet guardian I never realized I still had. 2 days later, Michael's lawsuit was officially filed. The news spread so fast I overheard whispers at the gas station. They say Elaine's son-in-law lost his mind. Trying to take full custody too. Men like that, absolute disasters. But I didn't care, not because I was numb, but because I knew this fight was bigger than gossip. On the morning of our first preliminary mediation hearing, Lydia shook so hard I thought she might collapse. "Mom, I can't face him." I held her hand firmly. "When you run, he can chase you, but when you face him, you become the thing he fears." Lydia inhaled shakily and then nodded. When we stepped into the hallway of the Buncombe County Courthouse, the first person I saw was Michael. He leaned against the wall, wearing a crisp white shirt and black tie, hair slicked, face arranged into a mask of calm. But his eyes gave him away. They were the eyes of a man drowning in his own panic. He saw Lydia first, then me, and immediately he smirked, that cold half-smile he always used when he thought he still held the upper hand. "Elaine, like I said, I'm bringing everything into the light." I stepped closer, no trembling, no fear. "Careful, Michael. The light has a way of showing who the monster really is." His face darkened. Before he could say another word, Grace Benton walked up behind us, coat brushing the floor, eyes sharp as a blade. "Mr. Foster," she said coolly. "From this moment on, any communication you want to make to my clients goes through me. If you violate that, I'll have security escort you out." Michael sneered. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" "Legal counsel for the Harper family." Grace handed him her card. "And I strongly advise you adjust your tone if you want to avoid destroying your own case." Michael scoffed. "You two are just delaying the inevitable." Grace's laugh was low, unbothered. "The inevitable is that you lose, Michael, and you know it." For the first time since this began, I saw Michael truly falter, a crack in his confidence. I tilted my head. "Anything else you'd like to say before we go inside and let the court speak for us?" He snarled. Elaine, you're tearing my family apart. I lifted an eyebrow. What family? The family you threatened to abandon if Lydia didn't kick out her own mother? Or the family where you controlled every breath your wife took? His jaw twitched violently. He turned to Lydia, voice sharp as broken glass. You traitor. Lydia straightened, not hiding behind me, not shrinking, her voice small but solid as stone. No, I'm finally protecting my child from you. That sentence hit Michael like a blow. Grace murmured, "Good girl," under her breath. At that moment, a court officer opened the door to the mediation room. But when I stepped inside, I froze for a heartbeat. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and intelligent eyes looked up from the desk. Judge Samuel Whitford. He saw me and stopped breathing for a second. His expression changed, not in surprise, but in recognition. Old recognition. "Elaine Harper?" he whispered. I smiled softly. "Long time no see, Samuel." The hallway fell silent. Michael stared, stunned. Lydia's mouth dropped open. Even Grace lifted an eyebrow as if she hadn't expected this particular twist in the story. Samuel walked toward me and shook my hand, with a respect deeper than I could explain. "Mrs. Harper, you were the one who taught me how to organize case files 30 years ago." I laughed quietly. "You still remember that?" "Remember? You were the only person who treated me kindly when I was just an intern." Michael stammered. You know her?" Samuel turned to him, and his warmth vanished instantly, replaced by icy authority. "I know her, and I know her integrity better than anyone else in this courthouse." Michael's face collapsed, like he just watched the keystone of his entire plan crumble. Samuel looked at me again. "Come in, Elaine. Let's get to the bottom of this." And in that moment, I knew my life, and Lydia's life, was about to turn to a brand new page. A page Michael Foster was absolutely not prepared for. When Judge Samuel Whitford invited us into the mediation room, it felt like stepping through a doorway into an entirely new chapter. Not a doorway into fear, but into the truth. The room itself wasn't large. Warm yellow lighting, a long wooden table, leather chairs, a window overlooking a small courtyard where the beech trees were turning golden in late fall. Peaceful. Almost absurdly peaceful, compared to the chaos about to unfold inside 3 people's hearts. Samuel sat at the head of the table. I sat on one side, Lydia beside me, her fingers gripping the edge of her sweater. Grace took the chair to my left, calm, composed, like a woman who'd already mapped out the entire chessboard. Michael sat across from us, shoulders rigid, hands clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. I could see it all in his eyes, the anger, the fear, and under it, a thin, trembling layer of desperation. Samuel set his pen down and laced his fingers together. "Let's begin." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of someone who'd watched too many lives crack open in this very room. Michael jumped in first, like a man desperate to seize control. "Your Honor, I want to make it clear. My mother-in-law has destroyed our marriage. Samuel lifted a hand. "Sit down, Michael. I'll ask. You'll answer only what I ask." Michael froze. For the first time, Lydia's shoulders dropped just a little, a tiny exhale of relief. Samuel opened the file Michael had submitted, flipped through a few pages, his expression unchanged. Then he turned to me. "Elaine, I want to hear from you first, from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." So I told him about the first days Michael came into my home, about the control he wrapped around Lydia, tighter and tighter, about the unannounced appraiser walking through my cabin like it was an abandoned listing, about the threats to have me evaluated, about the night I found Thomas's will, about the door slamming, the shouting, the way Michael tried to drag Lydia out of my cabin like she was something he owned. I spoke calmly. No trembling, no tears. Just a woman who had finally accepted the truth and decided she would protect what was left of her life. When I finished, the room fell silent. Not the light kind of silence, the heavy kind. the kind that feels like a verdict waiting to be spoken. Then Samuel turned to Lydia. "And you?" Lydia shook. I rested my hand on her knee, small, steady, enough to keep her grounded. "Your Honor," she began, her voice breaking at the edges. "I did love Michael, that's true. But I was more afraid of him than anything." She swallowed hard. He controlled everything in my life, my friends, my job, my phone, my money. And when I tried to keep even a little piece of myself, he threatened to leave, threatened to ruin my life. Her fists clenched. My mom didn't destroy my marriage, she just pulled me back from destroying myself. Those words cut straight through me. Michael shot to his feet.
"Lydia, don't you dare lie like that."
"Sit down, Michael," Samuel said. But Michael kept going, voice rising.
"You're only saying that because she's here, because she filled your head with—"
Samuel slammed his pen onto the table. The sound cracked through the room like thunder.
"Michael, sit down."
For the first time since I'd known him, I saw something real in Michael's eyes. Fear. He sank into his chair, his spine curling in on itself. Samuel adjusted his glasses, his voice lower now, but colder.
"I will say this once, just once. In this room, no one raises their voice at a woman, especially one who's pregnant."
Michael swallowed. Lydia instinctively brought a hand to her belly. Grace slid a stack of documents onto the table. "Your Honor, these are records showing Mrs. Harper holds 60% of the shares in the company where Miss Foster is employed, according to her late husband's will. I'm submitting them alongside verification from Hughes and Moore, the firm that maintained the investment records." Michael's face went from red to chalk white.
"What? She—"
"That," Grace said evenly, "is Thomas Harper's investment, not Elaine's scheme, and Mrs. Harper never used it to interfere with Michael's job or to manipulate her daughter." Samuel nodded. "Accepted." Michael snapped back.
"She's using it to threaten me."
"You," Grace replied calmly, "are using the law to threaten a mother and her unborn grandchild. Let's be very clear about who is doing what here." The air in the room tightened again, drawn taut, humming with tension. Then Samuel turned back to me, his gaze softened.
"Elaine, your husband was a good man. I remember him saying once, 'Elaine is the best person I know. I just hope life is gentle with her.'"
My chest ached. Samuel went on.
"I believed him then.
And after what I've heard today, I believe him even more." He turned to Michael. "Michael Foster, I have 3 questions for you." Michael straightened a little, as if bracing for a fight. The morning after mediation, Ridgeview Falls was swallowed in fog. A soft white veil clinging to the trails and pine trees like a ghost that hadn't made up its mind whether to leave or linger. As I poured my tea, the kitchen window rattled from the cold wind outside. The sun wasn't up yet, but I knew one thing. This calm wouldn't last. And I was right. Around 8 a.m., Lydia came running downstairs, her face drained of all color. "Mom, Michael is outside." My heart tightened in a single hard beat. "What? He's not allowed within—" "I know," Lydia whispered, trembling. "But he's in the yard, pacing, like he's not even in his right mind. I'm scared." I set my cup down. "Stay inside, lock the door, let me handle him." I stepped out onto the porch. The cold morning air slapped my face sharp as a blade, waking every cell in my body. And there, under the oak tree by the fence, stood Michael. Coat hanging open, hair disheveled, face gray and sunken. But his eyes burned red and wild, like an animal cornered and desperate. "Elaine," he rasped, "we need to talk." "You're violating a restraining order," I said, voice steady. "That doesn't matter," he exploded. "You ruined my life." "You did that yourself," I replied. "Stop blaming me." He let out an ugly laugh, a twisted, broken sound. "If you hadn't found that damn will, everything would have been fine." I stood tall, my heart beating, yes, but fear no longer ruled it. "Thomas protected me," I said, "and he protected Lydia from a man who sees women as property." Michael stepped closer, fists tightening. You think I'm just going to accept this? You think some court order is going to make me disappear from Lydia's life? Yes, I met his eyes without blinking. Because she needs air, Michael, and you suffocate everything you touch. A ragged breath tore out of him. She is my wife, he screamed. My wife, Elaine, not yours. The door behind me swung open.
Lydia stepped out and stood right next to me.
Michael. Her voice was soft, but cracked through the cold morning like thin glass. I used to be your wife. I'm not yours anymore. Michael's face contorted, pain, rage, fear, all twisting together like a storm with no direction.
Lydia, you're carrying my child. You can't just leave me.
Lydia's hand instinctively shielded her belly. Our baby doesn't need a father who terrifies its mother. The word struck him like a blade, straight into the chest.
You really said that?
He whispered. Yes, Lydia said. Michael's shoulders dropped, the fight in him crumbling like wet sand. But I knew men like him. They're most dangerous when they're falling apart. I spoke slowly, clearly. You need to leave before the police arrive, Michael.
Police? He spat. You think I'm scared of police? Or some old judge's signature?
He's not just a judge, I said, and he's not old.
He's a man who's watched lives collapse because of men like you. Michael stiffened. How do you even know him?
Because he's known me for 30 years. My voice lowered, but sharpened. He knows I'm decent, and in 10 minutes, he saw exactly who you are. Michael went pale. The last veil, the last little illusion he'd wrapped himself in, had been ripped open.
Elaine, he whispered, trembling. You planned this from the start, didn't you? You always wanted to destroy my family.
No. I stared straight at him. But I will not let you destroy my daughter. Just then, a car pulled up to the gate. Grace. Michael looked from the car, to me, to Lydia, and in that moment, I watched understanding dawn on him like a fatal sunrise. He had lost, not because of the will, not because of the shares, not because of the law. He lost because Lydia had stepped out of his shadow and into the light. He took one step back, then another. Then he turned and walked away. No threats, no last words, just silence. The gate clicked shut behind him. Lydia collapsed into my arms, sobbing into my shoulder. Mom, what if he comes back? What if he hurts me? I pulled her close, stroking her hair like I had when she was little. You're not alone anymore. We have the law, we have Grace, we have Judge Samuel. We have the entire Ridgeview community behind us. I lifted her chin gently. And most of all, you have yourself again. You walked away from a man who never loved you in the right way. Lydia hugged me tighter. Later that afternoon, we met Grace at her office to prepare for the next hearing. Her eyes were cold, the kind of cold forged from years of defending women who had been pushed to the brink. The hearing will come soon, Grace said, opening her laptop. We'll need to document the full history of his coercion, threats, and manipulation. Lydia whispered, I don't want to drag this out. Grace placed a hand on hers. You're not dragging it out for him. You're protecting your child. I nodded. We fight not to punish him. We fight to rebuild. Grace gave me a faint, approving smile. That's why I like working with you, Elaine. You're calm, like a mountain. But anyone who endangers your family pays the price. I laughed softly. Thomas always said that. The three of us, one elderly, one middle-aged, one young and pregnant, sat around a simple wooden desk, and yet I felt power rising between us. Not the kind that crushes, the kind that endures. That night, when we returned home, there was an envelope wedged under the door. No sender. I opened it. Just one handwritten line. I won't let you rest. Get ready. Lydia read it over my shoulder. Mom, he will come back, won't he? I folded the paper, set it on the table. Maybe, but this time he won't meet the same Elaine Harper. I rested my hand on my daughter's shoulder. And he won't meet the same Lydia Harper either. Lydia pressed a hand to her belly, not with fear this time, but with resolve. Mom, I want to protect my baby. I smiled at her, soft but certain, and I'll protect both of you, by every means necessary. The biggest battle was coming, the full trial, but I knew one thing. Michael was no longer facing a frightened 69-year-old woman in an old wooden cabin. He was facing a mother reborn and a daughter rising from ash. The morning of the official hearing, Asheville was so cold my breath turned into white smoke the second I stepped outside. Fog curled around the pines like strips of gray silk. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, feeling strangely calm, and yet also like I was standing at the edge of a long, steep drop. Lydia walked in. She wore a simple pale blue dress, her 5-month belly just starting to curve gently beneath her coat.
Mom,
she whispered, her voice shaking.
I'm scared.
I stood, took her hand, and squeezed. You're not just going in there for yourself. You're going for the baby. And for everything we've survived to get to this point. She nodded, eyes shimmering, but steady. We rode in Grace's car. The road to the Ridgeview courthouse wound past old brick buildings, past trees trying to decide whether to hold on to their last leaves or finally let them fall. Everything felt like it was in between seasons, just like us. Outside the courthouse, Michael was already there. Black coat, face pale as ash, hair combed back too neatly, as if he wanted to play the role of a respectable, wounded man. A performance. And he was praying someone would buy it. When Lydia stepped out of the car, Michael took half a step forward. Lydia, before we go in, I just want us to talk like adults. Lydia instinctively moved closer to me. No, Michael, there's nothing left to say. Grace slid in between them. You're standing too close, she said. Keep the distance set by the court order. Michael's jaw clenched, but he stepped back. A retreat that smelled like defeat. Inside the courtroom, the air felt thick, like the heavy stillness before a storm breaks. I sat to Lydia's left. Grace stood at our side, shuffling papers organized and composed. Michael sat on the opposite side, his attorney, the kind of man who wore a suit more expensive than Michael's career ever justified, kept leaning in, whispering in his ear, trying to patch up a crumbling image with polished phrases. But the highest seat in the room was still empty. Then the back door opened. Judge Samuel Whitford walked in, and the second he saw me, he stopped. Just for a heartbeat. But in that heartbeat, the entire room froze. His eyes, surprise, warmth, and something else, like a long-lost memory finally snapping back into place. He spoke. Mrs. Harper? I stood, almost on reflex. Yes, Your Honor. Every head in the courtroom turned toward me. Michael, his attorney, the few people in the gallery. Lydia clutched my hand. Mom, what's happening? She whispered. Samuel rested his hand on the bench, tilting his head. 25 years ago. Did you work in Family Justice Services? I exhaled softly. Yes, Your Honor. I was a clerk for Judge Harmon. A smile spread across his face, small, genuine, threaded with gratitude. I was an intern then. You were the one who taught me how to file cases. You handed me the first cup of coffee I ever had during that internship. You were the only one who treated me like a person, not just air. Michael went rigid. His attorney's expression flickered. Samuel looked at me again, his voice dropping, a little rougher. Mrs. Harper, I've never forgotten your kindness. I swallowed hard. Some wounds in life don't close with stitches or time. Sometimes they close with a simple sentence like that. The hearing began. Michael's attorney stood first, his tone dramatic, practiced. Your Honor, my client is the victim here, a husband whose marriage has been manipulated by his mother-in-law, Mrs. Elaine Harper. She has used her financial power and influence to. Samuel raised a hand. I've read the file, he said, his voice turning cool. What I want now is evidence, not your feelings about the story. The attorney blinked, just a second, but enough to show he hadn't prepared for that kind of judge. Michael's jaw flexed. Grace stepped forward. Your Honor, we submit as evidence audio recordings of threats, text message history showing coercion and emotional abuse, statements from neighbors who witnessed Mr. Foster yelling and damaging property, and medical reports documenting that Ms. Lydia Harper is pregnant and under significant stress. Samuel went through each document, his attention sharp and quiet, the kind that doesn't miss a thing. Michael's attorney tried to interject. "These messages could be stamped and authenticated," Grace said smoothly. "Digital signatures and time logs all verified." Samuel nodded once. Accepted. Michael burst out. "She's lying! Lydia's only saying this because her mother is poisoning her against me. Samuel struck the gavel. "Mr. Foster, sit down. This is not a stage for you to perform on." A quiet ripple of laughter moved through the back of the room. Michael flushed bright red. Then it was Lydia's turn. She stood, one hand resting over her stomach. Her voice trembled, but every word landed clear. "Your Honor, I don't want to fight my husband. I really don't. But I also don't want my child growing up with a man who controls and threatens its mother." She paused, swallowing. "I did love Michael. That was real. But the man sitting across from me today isn't the man I thought I married." Michael lowered his head. For the first time, he didn't look angry. He looked small. Then Samuel turned to me. "Mrs. Harper, I'd like to hear your final statement." I rose to my feet, my voice soft but steady. A mother doesn't destroy her child's family, but a mother also doesn't stand by and watch her child be destroyed. You could have heard a pin drop. I looked straight at Samuel. I don't want anything from Michael, not money, not property, not power. All I want is for my daughter to be safe and for my grandchild to grow up in love, not fear. Lydia sobbed quietly. Grace gave a small nod. Samuel lifted his pen over the file, and Michael, his eyes were empty, like no one had ever told him the truth about himself until this moment. Samuel stood. "The court has reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the risk factors," he said. The air in the room went tight, thin. "I rule as follows." Michael's fingers dug into the edge of the table. "Michael Foster is prohibited from contacting or approaching Lydia Harper and Elaine Harper indefinitely, until a full psychological evaluation is completed and a certified anger management program is successfully finished." Lydia's hand flew to her mouth. She started to cry, not out of grief, but out of something that sounded a lot like relief finally breaking loose. Samuel continued. "Full temporary custody is granted to Miss Lydia Harper. Mr. Foster is barred from making decisions regarding the child until he demonstrates real, sustained change." Michael's attorney went pale. Michael sat motionless, as if the air had been vacuumed out of his lungs. And then, the final blow. "Any further threats, intimidation, or violations of these orders will result in Mr. Foster's immediate arrest." The whole courtroom seemed to exhale. I felt something inside me slide back into place, like my heart had been off-center for years and was finally realigned. Samuel looked at me once more. There was a softness in his eyes that had nothing to do with law. "Kindness is never wasted, Mrs. Harper," he said quietly. "It just waits for the right day to come back to you." When we walked out of the courthouse, sunlight finally broke through the gray clouds. Lydia leaned her head on my shoulder. "Mom, we won," she whispered. I didn't say anything. I just wrapped my arm around her, around my daughter, around her unborn baby, like I was holding my whole life in one embrace. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the moment we finally stood back up. Stronger, straighter, and a little brighter than before. 3 weeks after the hearing, winter began to settle into Asheville. Soft white mist clung to the porch rail like breath on cold glass. I stood by the window with a steaming cup of tea in my hands, listening to Lydia upstairs rearranging the baby's room. Life was moving again, slow, steady, intentional, as if the universe was quietly putting the pieces back where they were always meant to be. That morning, I received a call from Grace Benton's office. "Elaine," her warm, steady voice said, "the paperwork for Thomas's assets, shares, and final directives is complete. We need you to come in and sign the official documents to activate everything." I held the phone a little tighter. not because I wanted money, but because this was the last part of Thomas's promise, the final piece of what he left behind for me. "Grace," I exhaled, "I'll be right there." Her office sat on the 9th floor of a glass building overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. When I stepped inside, Grace rose to greet me, wearing that gentle, knowing smile of someone who had watched me crawl from darkness into my own light. "Ready?" she asked. I took a breath. "I'm ready." On the table were 3 folders: Thomas's corporate shares at the company where Michael worked, the deeds to every property he left behind, the formation documents for the Harper Hearth Foundation. Grace placed a pen in my hand. "Sign here, and Thomas's full legacy becomes legally yours." I signed. Each stroke felt like a vow, not to wealth, but to the man who had protected me long after he was gone. Each signature pulled me further away from the woman who once lived small, and closer to the woman I was finally becoming. Grace slid the final folder toward me. "The Harper Hearth Foundation will officially operate starting today. What would you like the first initiative to be?" I looked out the window, at the drifting mountain fog that felt like memory itself. "I want to open a reading corner in Thomas's name," I said softly, "for older women trying to rebuild their lives, the same way I had to rebuild mine." Grace smiled. "He would be so proud of that." That afternoon, when I got home, Lydia was sitting on the floor, surrounded by tiny cream-colored baby clothes. "Mom, they called. The grant for the women's program got approved. I think this is really happening." I brushed her hair gently. "You've come a long way, Lydia. I'm so proud of you." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Mom, thank you for standing strong, even when I wasn't standing with you." I pulled her into my arms. No resentment, no old wounds. Just love big enough to stitch the torn places of our past. That evening, Grace and her husband, along with a few people from the foundation, joined us for dinner. Lydia set the table with the white lace cloth Thomas used to love. But something was different. The center chair, the one I always gave up, Lydia pulled it out and looked at me. "Mom, sit here." I blinked. "Sweetheart, why?" "Because this is your table, your home, your life. You're not sitting in the back row anymore." The table went quiet. The kind of quiet filled with understanding. So I sat. For the first time in years, I sat where I belonged. During dinner, everyone talked about the foundation's plans: financial literacy classes for older women, Thomas's reading corner, a safe space program for single mothers, and a tiny house retreat on the outskirts of Asheville. I listened, feeling like age 69 was somehow turning into age 29 again, like my life was starting over, not ending. After the guests left, Lydia looked at me and said, "Mom, I want to take you somewhere." "Where?" "Savannah. The city you always said feels like a deep breath held inside the heart. I think you deserve a new beginning in the place you dreamed of." I laughed. "You know I'm 69, right?" "And?" Lydia crossed her arms. "Since when does age decide who gets to begin again?" I looked at her, the determination in her eyes, the gentle smile, her hand resting over the child growing inside her. I nodded. "All right, let's go." 2 weeks later, we were driving south. The Blue Ridge curved behind us like a ribbon of green and memory. The wind smelled of pine and wet earth. I watched the scenery blur past and remembered everything. The night I was cornered, the letter Thomas left behind, the moment I stood up to Michael, the second Samuel recognized me. And now, we were on our way to something new. In Savannah, Lydia took me to a small cafe near Forsyth Park. Sunlight filtered through the drooping oaks draped in Spanish moss. The air smelled of river water and old stories. I sat on a wooden chair under the porch, and I swear I felt a hand rest gently on my shoulder. Thomas, I knew it. That night, we walked along the river. Lydia slipped her hand into mine. "Mom, do you regret anything?" I looked at the gray-blue water lapping against the stones. "Yes, I regret not standing up sooner. But I never regret the days I spent protecting you." Tears streamed down her cheeks. My daughter had grown, not in years, but in survival. "Mom," she choked out,
I'll teach my child to love you the way I should have all along.
I held her close against the wind off the river. That's enough, sweetheart. That's enough. When we returned to Asheville, I walked into the small room I'd turned into a library. Afternoon light fell across Thomas's old wooden desk. I placed a wooden plaque on the shelf. Thomas Harper Reading Corner, for women who need a place to begin again. I stood there for a long time, not crying, just breathing, softly, lightly. And for the first time in many, many years, I felt peace settle inside my chest. Enough peace to move forward. Enough peace to forgive. Enough peace to live the rest of my life as myself. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you. I hope my story reminds you of this. You are never too old to stand up. Never too late to change your life. And never too far gone to protect your own light. If this story touched you, leave me a comment. Or hit like and subscribe so I can keep bringing you more true, raw, healing stories. For you, and for anyone who has ever been afraid to step out of the back row of their own life. Thank you for being here. Good dada.